Tommy Jansen stood on the lush green fairway of the local golf club, his eyes focused on the distant flag fluttering in the breeze. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the manicured grass. He drew his club back and swung, the satisfying thwack of the ball echoing in the still evening air. As the ball sailed through the sky, he allowed himself a moment of contentment. Golf was one of the few escapes he had from his increasingly complicated home life. After his round, Tommy drove to the riding club stable, where Lena's horse, Star, was kept. The stable smelled of hay and leather, a familiar scent that Tommy found oddly comforting. Lena, with her brown hair pulled back into a ponytail, was already there, brushing Star's mane. Her face lit up when she saw her father. "Dad, come see." "Star learned a new trick today," she exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Tommy smiled, his worries momentarily forgotten. "Show me, sweetheart," he said, walking over to join her. He watched as Lena guided Star through a series of simple steps, her laughter ringing through the stable. These moments with Lena were precious, a balm for his troubled mind. At home, however, things were different. Sandra, his wife, had started to exert more control over their daily lives. It was subtle at first, insisting on what they would have for dinner, which events they should attend, how they should spend their weekends. Tommy, busy with his demanding job, often chose to acquiesce rather than argue. "Tommy, I think we should repaint the living room." "The color is too drab," Sandra said one evening as they sat in their living room. She was flipping through a home decor magazine, her brow furrowed in concentration. Tommy glanced up from his newspaper. "Sure, if you think it's necessary," he replied, his tone indifferent. Sandra sighed, a hint of frustration in her voice. "It's not about necessity, Tommy. It's about making our home more inviting." "All right, Sandra. Whatever you think is best," he conceded, not wanting to escalate the discussion. He went back to his newspaper, but the exchange left a lingering unease in his chest. As the days passed, Tommy began to feel the imbalance in their relationship more acutely. Sandra's decisions seemed to dominate their lives, and he found himself increasingly sidelined. Yet, his workload prevented him from addressing these feelings. He was often tired, coming home late and missing the casual intimacy they once shared. One evening, Sandra returned home looking particularly exhausted. Her eyes were shadowed with fatigue, and she dropped her bag heavily onto the kitchen counter. "Tough day at work?" Tommy asked, concern evident in his voice. Sandra nodded, rubbing her temples. "You have no idea. I got promoted today, but it's overwhelming. There's so much to learn and so much responsibility." "Congratulations," Tommy said, trying to sound enthusiastic. "That's great news." Sandra managed a weak smile. "Thanks, but it's already wearing me out." The promotion, which should have been a cause for celebration, brought more stress and distance between them. Sandra's new role demanded longer hours and greater mental energy. She became more irritable, and their conversations grew shorter. The evenings they once spent cuddling on the couch or sharing stories about their day became rare. One night, as they lay in bed, Tommy reached out to hold Sandra, but she gently pushed him away. "Not tonight, Tommy. I'm really tired," she whispered, turning her back to him. Tommy stared at the ceiling, a sense of helplessness washing over him. He missed the warmth of her touch, the connection they used to share. He knew something had to change, but he didn't know where to start. As the promotion continued to take its toll on Sandra, the rift between them widened. Tommy found solace in his time at the golf club and the stable, but the growing distance at home was inescapable. He loved Sandra, but their relationship was slowly unraveling, and he feared what the future might hold. As the weeks went by, Tommy couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Sandra had become increasingly reluctant to discuss her work. Whenever he asked about her day, she offered only vague responses, brushing off his questions with a tired wave of her hand. "It's just work stuff, Tommy. Nothing interesting," she would say, avoiding eye contact. One evening, as they sat at the dinner table, Sandra seemed particularly distracted. She pushed her food around her plate, her mind clearly elsewhere. Tommy decided to press her for more information. "Sandra, is everything okay at work?" "You seem really stressed out lately," Tommy said, trying to keep his tone gentle. Sandra sighed, putting down her fork. "It's just been a lot, Tommy. The new project is demanding, and there's so much to manage. I need to go on a business trip this Friday." "It's important." "A business trip? Where to?" Tommy asked, His curiosity piqued. Just to a small town on the coast, about 45 kilometers from here, Sandra replied, still not meeting his gaze. Why do you need to stay overnight? It's not that far away, Tommy pressed, feeling a knot of suspicion tighten in his stomach. Sandra hesitated, then said, the client can't meet until late in the day, and there's a lot to discuss. It just makes more sense to stay there overnight rather than driving back late. Tommy couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. Who's the client, he asked, already suspecting the answer. Sandra finally looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of frustration and weariness. It's Oscar Pilar. He's the one handling this project. Tommy's heart sank. Oscar Pilar was notorious for his unsavory reputation. Oscar Pilar? Are you serious? That guy is a known predator. Why is your company even dealing with him? Sandra's discomfort was palpable. Tommy, it's just business. I'm not happy about it either, but it's out of my hands. My boss assigned me this project, and I have to see it through. Tommy's mind raced with thoughts of Oscar's dubious character and the stories he had heard about his manipulative tactics. Sandra, are you sure this is just about business? You seem really uneasy about this whole thing. Sandra stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Tommy, I'm telling you, it's fine. I can handle it. You need to trust me. Tommy wanted to believe her, but the doubt gnawed at him. I do trust you, Sandra, but I don't trust Oscar. Please, just be careful. Sandra gave him a tight-lipped smile. I will. Don't worry about it. Despite her assurances, Tommy couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. He decided to investigate further. The next day, he took some time off work and visited a few colleagues who might know more about Oscar's dealings. It didn't take long for him to confirm his worst fears. Oscar was still up to his old tricks, using his influence to manipulate business deals for his personal gain. Determined to protect his wife, Tommy confronted her that evening. Sandra, I did some checking. Oscar Pilar is bad news. You shouldn't be dealing with him, let alone spending the night near him. Sandra's face flushed with anger and something else, fear. Tommy, I told you, it's my job. I don't have a choice. Tommy felt a surge of frustration. There's always a choice, Sandra. If something feels wrong, you need to speak up. Sandra's eyes flashed with defiance. And risk my job? You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Just let me handle it. Okay. Tommy stared at her, realizing that no matter how much he pushed, Sandra was determined to go through with the trip. The tension between them hung heavy in the air, unspoken words and unresolved fears creating a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge. As Sandra packed her bags the next morning, Tommy watched her with a sinking heart. He wanted to trust her, but the fear of what might happen gnawed at him. Promise me you'll be careful, he said quietly. Sandra paused, her expression softening for a moment. I promise, Tommy. I'll be back before you know it. Tommy nodded, but as he watched her drive away, he couldn't shake the feeling that this trip would change everything. Determined not to be a passive observer, he decided to take matters into his own hands. If Sandra wouldn't listen, maybe a direct confrontation with Oscar would put an end to this nightmare. The next evening, Sandra returned from her business trip, looking more exhausted than ever. Her eyes were shadowed, and her usually impeccable appearance was slightly disheveled. Tommy could tell something was wrong, but she brushed off his concerns as soon as he voiced them. Hey, how was the trip? Tommy asked, trying to sound casual while suppressing his anxiety. It was fine, Sandra replied tersely, dropping her bag by the door and heading straight for the kitchen. Did everything go smoothly with Oscar? He pressed, watching her closely. Sandra paused, her back to him, and took a deep breath. Yes, Tommy, everything was fine. We discussed the project, had dinner, and I stayed in the guest house as planned. Can we please not talk about work right now? I'm really tired. Tommy frowned. I'm just concerned, Sandra. You look more than just tired. Are you sure nothing else happened? She turned to face him, a flicker of irritation in her eyes. Nothing happened, Tommy. Can we drop it? Tommy raised his hands in surrender. All right, I'm just trying to make sure you're okay. Sandra's expression softened slightly, but the tension between them remained. She was clearly hiding something, but Tommy couldn't force her to open up. Instead, he decided to investigate further on his own. The next day, Tommy used his lunch break to visit the golf club where Oscar was known to frequent. As he approached the lush, sprawling greens, he spotted Oscar laughing with a group of men near the 15th hole. Tommy felt a surge of anger and determination. This man had manipulated his wife and possibly put their marriage at risk. He waited until Oscar was somewhat isolated before making his move. Approaching him, Tommy's jaw tightened as he called out, "Oscar, we need to talk." Oscar turned, a smirk playing on his lips. "Tommy Jansen, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Tommy didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Stay away from Sandra. Whatever game you're playing, it ends now." Oscar chuckled, shaking his head. "Tommy, you're blowing this out of proportion. Sandra and I are just colleagues." Tommy's hands clenched into fists. "Colleagues don't spend the night together in a guest house. I know your reputation, Oscar. If you think you can manipulate my wife, you're dead wrong." Oscar's smirk faded, replaced by a hard, calculating look. "Careful, Tommy. You don't want to make an enemy of me." Before he could think it through, Tommy swung at Oscar, his fist connecting with a satisfying crunch against Oscar's jaw. The other men on the course rushed over, pulling Tommy off as Oscar stumbled back, clutching his face. "What the hell, Jansen? Are you out of your mind?" one of the men shouted as they restrained Tommy. Oscar, recovering quickly, spat out a mouthful of blood and glared at Tommy. "You'll pay for this, Jansen. Count on it." The police were called, and Tommy found himself in the back of a squad car, seething with anger and frustration. At the station, he explained his side of the story, but the officers were more concerned with the assault charges. After a few hours, he was released with a warning, but he knew this wasn't over. When Tommy arrived home, Sandra was waiting for him, her face pale and tense. "What did you do, Tommy?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. "I confronted Oscar." "He deserved it," Tommy replied, his voice still simmering with rage. Sandra shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "You're going to ruin everything. If you keep this up, I'll have no choice but to file for divorce." "I can't live like this." Tommy felt a pang of guilt but couldn't back down. "I'm trying to protect you, Sandra. Can't you see that?" She didn't respond, instead retreating to the bedroom and locking the door behind her. Tommy stood there, feeling the weight of their crumbling relationship bearing down on him. Determined to uncover the truth and protect his marriage, Tommy decided to take more drastic measures. He installed hidden cameras at the summer house, hoping to gather evidence of Oscar's true intentions. It was a desperate move, but Tommy felt he had no other choice. The following days were filled with tension. Sandra avoided Tommy, their conversations reduced to curt exchanges. Tommy watched the camera feeds obsessively, waiting for any sign that could confirm his suspicions. One evening, as he was reviewing the footage, an alert pinged on his phone. He saw Oscar's car pulling up to the summer house. His heart raced as he watched the scene unfold, hoping this would provide the evidence he needed to finally confront Sandra with the truth. Tommy sat in his den, eyes glued to the screen as the alert from the hidden cameras at the summer house pinged. He watched intently as Oscar's sleek silver SUV pulled up next to Sandra's car. His heart pounded in his chest, a mix of fear and anger brewing within him. He quickly switched to live audio, hoping to catch their conversation. Inside the summer house, Sandra and Oscar's voices grew louder, their tones tense and confrontational. "You promised this would be over quickly," Oscar, Sandra said, her voice edged with frustration. "I don't want to be involved in your schemes any longer." Oscar's voice was cold and menacing. "You don't get to make demands, Sandra. I paid good money to secure this deal, and I expect you to hold up your end." Sandra sounded desperate. "This isn't what I signed up for. I never agreed to this." Tommy's blood boiled as he listened. He quickly set his phone to record, capturing every word of their heated exchange. "You don't have a choice," Oscar growled. "If you don't cooperate, I'll make sure everyone knows about your affair with Max. You'll lose everything: your job, your reputation, and your family." There was a moment of silence, followed by Sandra's shaky voice. "Please, Oscar, don't do this. I'll do what you ask, but leave my family out of it." Tommy couldn't listen any longer. He stormed out of the house, jumping into his car and speeding towards the summer house. The confrontation had to end now. When he arrived, Tommy saw Oscar's SUV parked outside. He quietly approached the house, peering through the window. Inside, Oscar was standing close to Sandra, his hand gripping her arm tightly. The sight of his wife being intimidated and manipulated fueled Tommy's rage. Without hesitation, Tommy burst through the door. "Get your hands off her!" "Oscar," he shouted, his voice echoing through the room. Oscar released Sandra and turned to face Tommy, a sneer spreading across his face. "Tommy. I was wondering when you'd show up." Tommy didn't waste any time. He lunged at Oscar, grabbing him by the collar and shoving him against the wall. "You stay away from my wife," he snarled. "If I ever see you near her again, I'll make sure you regret it." Oscar, clearly intimidated, tried to regain his composure. "You think you can scare me, Jansen? You're just a desperate husband trying to save his crumbling marriage." Tommy's grip tightened. "This isn't just about my marriage. It's about your sick games. Leave Sandra alone, or I'll go to the police with everything I have." Oscar's eyes flickered with fear. All right, I'll back off," he said, trying to sound nonchalant but failing. Tommy let go of him and stepped back. "Get out of here. And don't come back." Oscar scrambled out of the house, hurrying to his SUV and driving off without another word. Tommy turned to Sandra, who looked shaken and pale. "Tommy, I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Tommy took a deep breath, his anger slowly dissipating. "We'll deal with this, Sandra. Together." The next day, Tommy met with his lawyer, determined to put an end to Oscar's manipulation. They arranged a meeting with Sandra's employer, presenting the evidence of Oscar's coercion and Sandra's compromised position. The employer, realizing the potential scandal, agreed to cancel the deal with Oscar and conduct an internal investigation into the corruption within the company. That evening, Sandra sat with Tommy in their living room, her eyes red from crying. "Tommy, I need to tell you the truth," she said, her voice trembling. "I had an affair with Max. It started because I was desperate to secure my promotion, but it quickly spiraled out of control." Tommy listened, his heart heavy with the weight of her confession. "Why didn't you tell me sooner, Sandra?" "I was scared," she admitted. "Scared of losing you, scared of what would happen if the truth came out. And then Oscar found out and used it against me." Tommy nodded slowly. "I understand. We'll get through this, Sandra. But things need to change. We need to rebuild our trust." Sandra nodded, tears falling freely. "I know, Tommy. I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Tommy took her hand, a sense of resolve settling over him. They had a long road ahead, but for the first time in months he felt a glimmer of hope. Together, they could face the challenges ahead and rebuild their life, one step at a time. Over the next few days, Sandra opened up more about her relationship with Max and the events that led to her entanglement with Oscar. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, she began to unravel the story. "It all started innocently enough," Sandra began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Max and I would go out for lunch, just as friends. He seemed like a mentor, someone who could guide me through my new responsibilities at work. But then he started having financial problems. His divorce had left him almost bankrupt, and he was desperate for money." Tommy listened intently, the anger in him giving way to a deeper understanding of the pressure Sandra had been under. "So Max suggested you help him with Oscar's deal in exchange for..." Sandra nodded, tears welling up in her eyes again. "He convinced me that it was a one-time thing, that it would secure our future at the company. But once I was involved, Oscar found out and used it against me. He threatened to expose everything if I didn't comply with his demands." Tommy sighed, running a hand through his hair. "And you felt trapped?" "Yes," Sandra admitted. "I was so scared, Tommy. I didn't know how to get out of it without losing everything. I should have come to you, but I was ashamed." Tommy squeezed her hand. "I wish you had, Sandra, but what's done is done. We need to focus on moving forward." Sandra nodded, her expression resolute. "I know I've made terrible mistakes. I regret them more than you can imagine. I just want to make things right, for us and for Lena." As they worked through their issues, Tommy found himself spending more time at the riding club stable. His friendship with Marianne deepened, providing him with a sense of comfort and understanding that he desperately needed. Marianne, too, was navigating a rocky marriage, and their shared experiences brought them closer. One evening, after helping Lena with her horse, Marianne and Tommy sat on a bench overlooking the paddock. The setting sun cast a warm glow over the landscape, and for a moment, the world felt peaceful. "Thank you for being there for me," Marianne Tommy said, his voice sincere. "I don't know what I'd do without your support." Marianne smiled, her eyes soft with empathy. "You've been there for me too, Tommy. We're both going through tough times. It helps to have someone who understands." Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, and it wasn't long before Marianne confided in Tommy about her decision to leave her husband. "I've had enough, Tommy. The arguments, the lack of support, it's not a healthy environment for me or the kids. I want to move forward, and I think moving in with you would be the best step for us." Tommy felt a mixture of relief and happiness. "I think that's a great idea, Marianne. We can support each other and provide a stable home for the kids." Marianne moved in with Tommy, bringing her 2 children. The house, once filled with tension and silence, was now bustling with life and laughter. Lena bonded quickly with Marianne's daughter, theirs, and the two became inseparable. Marianne's son, Alex, found a role model in Tommy, who took him under his wing. The new family dynamic was not without its challenges, but the love and support they provided each other made all the difference. Tommy and Marianne found solace in their shared experiences, and their relationship blossomed into something beautiful and resilient. One night, as they sat together on the porch, Tommy looked over at Marianne, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. "You've brought so much joy back into my life, Marianne. I didn't think I could feel this happy again." Marianne leaned against him, her eyes reflecting the same sentiment. "You've done the same for me, Tommy. We've both been through so much, but together, we're stronger." Their relationship, built on trust and mutual respect, provided a solid foundation for their children. Lena, theirs, and Alex thrived in the loving environment, finding stability and happiness that had been missing for so long. As the months passed, Tommy and Marianne continued to support each other through the ups and downs. Their love grew deeper, and their blended family became a source of strength and joy. They knew that they had found something truly special, and they were determined to cherish and protect it. Together, they faced the future with hope and determination, ready to overcome any obstacle that came their way. The past was behind them, and a brighter, happier future lay ahead.